Hey guys, what's going on? It's good to see you. Today's topic is mechanics, part 3 of a 3-part series on what makes a great story. I'm Tony Genovese, better known as Gary Oak, and this is a piece of the Literature Pie. So before we get into things, those of you who are familiar with part 2 will know that there is a contest, and the winner of said contest will receive a signed copy of Past Sins. And today is the day where the winner will be announced. But that'll have to wait just a little bit. Now, as per usual, we will be continuing with the Past Sins example, for I find it is good in one field, so-so in another, and not so good in another. And unfortunately for you diehard Past Sins fans, this is the video where I'll be coming down on it pretty hard, because its mechanics are, despite the amount of revisions, not that good at all. So what are mechanics? Mechanics are grammar in a broad sense, not just, are all the commas and periods in the right place? Is this semicolon necessary? Is the period or the comma on the right side of the quotation marks? Did you use the correct dash? Did you use the dashes in the right place? Should this word be hyphenated? Should that word be hyphenated? That's more punctuation. Grammar is also stuff like sentence structure, diction, your basic syntax when it comes to just writing. So it's passive voice versus active voice. It's a very broad and complicated topic that takes years and years of practice, and it starts out being the more scientific part of writing, but once you get really good at it, then it becomes a more stylistic thing, and masters of the craft are able to take more liberties. For example, sometimes if you're a grandmaster at writing, you'll be able to get away with a comma splice, or a sentence that's 140 words long. There's actually a novel out there that is, or a novella that's one sentence long, and it's almost 15,000 words. I don't believe it, but apparently something like this exists. So why are mechanics important? Because, if any of you guys have taken an English class from grade 10 to grade 12 level, which I assume all of you have, you'll submit your essay, your English teacher will mark it up with a red pen, and it's going to be bleeding red ink. And all of those are little corrections like comma here, comma there, wrong word choice, reverse these words around, cut this sentence, cut that sentence, like that type of thing. Why is it important? All these little things add up, and even if you don't have a trained eye like I do to be able to identify these mechanical problems and point them out, or be able to identify a good sentence and say, yeah, this is actually a good sentence because of X, Y, and Z, it gives you this overall impression while you read, kind of in the back of your mind. So if you're reading a story and you're like, this story isn't that good, I don't know why, but it's not that good, or this is fantastic, but I don't know why it's fantastic, chances are there is, mechanics are playing a big factor into this. And believe me, the little things do add up, and a published novel it's an example of a work that has achieved this level of magical, effortless perfection, and in order to get there, you have to spend months and months, sometimes years, polishing every last little sentence with an editor. In order to get a book published, what happens is generally people actually hire editors before they send it to a publishing house, because it's, manuscripts now are a buyer's market. So what happens is you hire a professional editor and pay them about $20 to $30 an hour to edit your entire book. And then you send that to the publishing house, and if they accept it, they will spend another 2 to 4 months, depending on the house and depending on what season they want to publish your book in and when they accept it, to have you and their in-house editor do a direct correspondence back and forth and edit it to the house's style. For example, some houses like to use toward with no S, and some like to use towards with an S. And both cases are correct as long as you pick one and stick with it, but if you're submitting to that house, their say is final. So if you like saying toward with no S, but you want to get published with a house that says towards, you're going to have to find and replace and put the S in there in your final manuscript, and that's what's going to hit the shelves. I'm going to be going through the prologue and the first chapter of Past Sins in a decent amount of detail. Hopefully the video won't get too long, but this is going to be a wade in and get your hands dirty, because I need to basically identify examples and show you examples so you get a good sense of what I'm talking about. In order to get a good grounding in this sort of thing, you're going to want to read a book called The Elements of Style. Stephen King has named it the most important book for any aspiring writer to read. I will be doing a Literature Pie video, hopefully, on it in the not-so-distant future. But now let us switch over to the screen here. This is the current edition of Past Sins on FimFiction. I'm going to be using this version of Past Sins because I assume it will be the most up-to-date. So let's start off with a good example. Amidst the dim candlelight, the single unicorn sat with his head bent down, eyes shut. That's a good sentence. I'm not sure if it's the best opening sentence, but that's a good sentence. And I like this entire first paragraph. It's quite evocative, his reflection dancing on the water, and pond was nestled deep within the ever-free forest, so immediately we get a sense of the beginning of the story, where it is, and there's a little bit of confusion there, so it's kind of an intriguing, it's maybe a bit eerie. So now we got to scroll down. There will be a bit of pauses as I scroll down to different places. This is the first one I'm going to identify right here. Notice the dialogue tag asked when there's a question mark. This is a more acceptable case, but more often than not, you're going to want to use said instead of what's called a said bookism. Past Sins has a massive, massive problem with said bookisms. It's one of the biggest problems that Past Sins has mechanically. Basically, they are an artifact of what you were taught in high school, and they are actually generally a telegraph of extremely bad and unprofessional writing. The reason why is because usually the beat surrounding the dialogue or the dialogue itself implicitly states what you are attempting to say with your said bookism. For example, asked. There's a question mark here, so we know for a fact it's a query. So saying asked is redundant. You're repeating yourself. You are implicitly saying so-and-so asked this question, and then you're immediately going so-and-so asked explicitly. That's kind of bludgeoning your reader over the head with just information over and over again as if we're too dull to get it, or you're not confident enough in your writing ability that you have to use these, hackneyed means to prop up what you have written. There are better examples of that. That's just the first one. Answered, generally said, is better. Snipped. If this doesn't read like a snip, then you're doing it wrong. If I should be able to get that Nightwind snipped this bit of dialogue here. If I don't get it and I have to rely on that said bookism in order to get it, then something is definitely wrong with your writing, and you should consider adding physical body language or what have you, or rephrasing your dialogue in order to make it, just implied. You don't even need a dialogue tag here. You can have Nightwind perform some type of physical action within that same paragraph, and because he's doing that, we know who's speaking. There's no one else who could be talking. Nexus spoke. That's just an example of a bad said bookism that shouldn't be there. Let's keep going here. Yeah, asked. Just barely managing to feel her voice. That's okay. Here's the next part. This is a example of what is called an interrobang. It's a exclamation mark followed by a question mark, or vice versa. You will see these often in casual speech. You will see them all the time in comics. However, if you look at a proper published story, you will not see interrobangs. The reason why is interrobangs are simply put too informal for this level of writing. One way to look at it is a lot of people like to say it's either normal English or academic English, and most people don't realize there is actually a big gradient of formality between the two. Yes, academic English is generally the highest level English you can get in terms of how formal things are. We're not trying to write an essay here, but we are sliding a bit toward the informal side. However, there's casual slang and comic books and stuff like that, which is here, and then the middle ground is the story. The story is usually more businesslike, and its formality really does vary based on the tone of the story, the narrator, and what you're trying to accomplish. This is a generic fantasy story, and interrobangs are simply put incorrect. They are objectively wrong. This is one of those scientific aspects of writing that I was talking about, where it's either right or it's wrong, and there's no middle ground, no argument, nothing. It's simply put too informal. Another example of this is using all right as one word as opposed to all and then right as in two words. You always use two words. If you use one, that's going to be for, like, again, a comic book or casual speech, etc., just not in formal, proper writing. Another example is okay. Okay is okay capitalized or OKAY. You always go with OKAY. Fortunately, past tense has all right as two words, and I believe okay as 4 letters. So that's good. But yeah, but past tense definitely does use interrobangs, and one thing you got to watch out for is overuse of exclamation marks. There's 2 in close proximity here. Even if a lot of dialogue does require exclamation marks, you don't want to use too much of it. And here dialogue is just standing on its own. I actually need to read this to figure out who's speaking. So it is spell nexus. It sounds like spell nexus here, and then this dialogue for some reason is on its own line. And then for some reason there's another line, and is this spell nexus speaking twice right here? That makes no sense. There's definitely some paragraphing issues there that could easily be fixed. This is an example of onomatopoeia. You generally want to take onomatopoeia out of your writing. You can kind of use it, but I've seen Penstroke. He definitely overuses it in past tense. Yes, onomatopoeia is a stylistic thing you can get away with, especially if it's in a book intended for a younger audience. But I feel that there is definitely too much of it here, and it's a bit too jarring. Yes, this does achieve a jarring effect because it's in italics, it's in all caps, it's got an exclamation point. However, if you write something in a jarring way, you achieve a similar effect without being so crude. And then, yeah, nexus called out. That, again, that's just another said bookism. I could spend hours pointing out said bookisms. Another case of informality here is 3 exclamation marks. You never ever use more than one. Even though, yes, it is shouting. All caps is something some people abhor, but I'm fine with. It depends on your style and the style of your publishing house or the style guide you follow, etc. I think it's fine if used in moderation, and I think Penstroke does use it in fairly decent moderation here. So that's alright. Now I know there is another point that I found here. Let's search for it. This is a little bit I think I found this is a little bit confusing. Or maybe not this. Yeah, here it is. This is an example of what we call Burly Detective Syndrome. So far, all we know is that the character's name is the Lieutenant, or Lieutenant if you're Canadian like me. The thing is, lieutenant is not capitalized, so it's not a proper noun, so that's a little bit odd. And yes, nitpicking at this level is something that you look at when it comes to mechanics, and all this stuff is relevant if you want a nice, polished story that has reached a place where it does not really need revision. And this is fine. He uses the proper noun twice in a row, and I can understand the paragraph break because this is a fairly long paragraph, and this would be a little bit massive. But the thing is, there's another paragraph of him here, and these aren't too long, and veteran guard instead of lieutenant, that's called burly detective syndrome because you're referring to a character by anything other than, the proper, like their name or him or her or he or she, etc. A lot of people will know it as lavender unicorn syndrome, but I refuse to call it by that name because according to the it's from the Turkey City Lexicon. Same with said bookism. The Turkey City Lexicon is actually an amazing website that you should all go to when it comes to this sort of thing. So that's it for this part. I'll just do a quick little look at chapter 1 right here. This is actually a really, really bad error I found in the first chapter that is a real example of being mechanically amateur. Right here it says, Rarity, Twilight half shouted. That means this whole paragraph is Twilight, and that's it. Because a paragraph is, they all have their own specific subjects, and when there's a shift in subject, you want to break and go to the next paragraph. That's the basic rule for it. However, then we start talking about Spike, and we're still talking about Spike, and then he actually speaks in this same paragraph. And that is a flagrant violation of standard paragraphing rules where one speaker, one paragraph. That's one of the first things you learn in, like grade 8 English. It's very, very basic, and I'm really surprised this error survived countless copy edits. I have seen examples of 2 speakers in one paragraph, but that is a very rare case, and you need to be an absolutely fantastic writer. And when I say that, I mean a true master of the craft in order to pull something like that off. You can try, but chances are you're going to fail, and it should get, shot down or revised by your editor or people you workshop your story with. Now, I'm going to talk about this sentence a little bit more here. She was sitting. That's an example of passive construction. Was sitting, the word was is doing the heavy lifting of this sentence. Instead of that, you should say she sat. Sometimes you do want the was ing syntax. However, it takes you longer to say what you're trying to say, and thus it is less concise and it weakens your sentence overall. One important thing to note about sentences is you want to place the most relevant information that you're trying to convey in your sentence at the beginning of the sentence, because if it's at the beginning of the sentence or close to the beginning of the sentence, that is where the emphasis lies. So the information at the end of the sentence is less relevant. And if you have relevant at both ends of the sentence, chances are you might want to just find a way to split your sentence into 2 and just go from there. There's nothing wrong with short sentences. You don't want purely short sentences, because purely short sentences it's quite monotonous. Same with a whole bunch of long sentences. That makes it really difficult to read. And another example of said bookism, Twilight assured her. It should be quite explicit here that she's assuring Rarity, so this is just unneeded. This is an interesting example here. I want to point this out. You see how there's inverted quotes and then a period and then close quotes? Now, depending on the style you go with, this is right or this is wrong. The style I follow is the period would actually go inside the inverted quote. So it would read, fine, period, single quote, double quote. However, in some styles, the way it is right here is correct. So just remember that. Sometimes you will encounter these disagreements in styles where one style guide will say, do this, and some editors will say, do this, and some editors and style guides will say, no, do it this way. Unless you're trying to get published with a certain publishing house or what have you, just stick with whatever style you find most comfortable, and preferably what is most commonly used in your country. So I believe the Canadian style is to do it the opposite of this. At least that's what my English professor prefers, so that's the style I'm sticking with unless I have to change for whatever reason. So, of course, I could keep going on about mechanics, but I don't want to make this video 3 hours long. You guys do hopefully have an idea of this, and I hope this was helpful. So now that brings us to the conclusion of this video. The ideas are fantastic. The execution is both good and bad in places. And the mechanics are definitely at a amateurish point that, well, most of the grammar, most of the punctuation, I should say, is quite good, as it should be, because it has been polished and rewritten numerous times. Overall, I feel it still displays a lot of low-level writing and a lot of amateur qualities that make the mechanics less than desirable, and I would say they are definitely a significant step below what Equestria Daily would accept today. So believe it or not, if you have a mechanics-heavy pre-reader, and Past Sins was submitted to Equestria Daily as is right now, chances are it would get sent back with a rejection letter and not get posted, and it's one of the most popular stories in the fandom because of increasing standards from 2011 to present day, and continuing increasing standards as there are more stories out there. Now, in order to reaffirm this, I'm not the only person who says this. There is one person, RB-47, he used to run the Pony Fiction Vault, which is now the Royal Canterlot Library. Basically, the Pony Fiction Vault, and that is why I talked about Past Sins in the first place, because it has a level of familiarity, and that and I have read it, so I actually have a basis for any compliments or criticisms that I can offer the story. The other 4 stories are Fallout Equestria, My Little Dashie, Cupcakes, and I think it's the Conversion Bureau. I believe those are the other 4, and Past Sins. So remember, Past Sins is in the same category as Cupcakes. Just remember that. Cupcakes didn't make it in because it was a good piece of writing. Cupcakes was schlock, but it's in. I'm not saying Past Sins is schlock, I'm saying Past Sins is average overall, but you can't just paint the average brush over it as I've broken down over these videos. It has very strong and very weak elements, and it's kind of a wash in the end. But it's really important to be able to dissect a story and see what's good and what's bad about it, what works and what doesn't. Because as writers and as critics, we have to be able to do that in order to further our understanding and further develop our stories. Because if you write a story and you're like, oh, this is crap, chances are there are parts of your story that are fantastic, and those are the parts you want to hold on to. Now, to conclude, if Past Sins were a story in a creative writing workshop of mine, which I attend all the time because, you know, that's what creative writing class is looking at stories, reading them as homework, and then critiquing them less in depth than I am now, of course. And I would look at it and I'd be like, okay, but there needs to be significant cuts. It's overwritten, which is fine. All you have to do is trim, and the mechanics need a significant amount of work before it's in a place where you would want to submit it anywhere. Oh yeah, so I guess we've got this contest thing. It would be kind of odd if we promised the copy of Past Sins and never delivered. So I've been telegraphed by Pico Pie here that we have a winner. According to this, Curbon's 1200 is the winner. Congratulations. Please respond to the message in your YouTube inbox to go about claiming your prize. Speaking of contests, my colleague, CCAT, she has a new video coming out. hopefully next week. I don't know. But her first video is quite fantastic. And there should be a link somewhere around, maybe here, maybe there. I'm not that good at this yet, so it's somewhere around this video, if not in the description down here. Go check that out. And I heard something about a contest related to her videos. I have no idea what it's about, but hey, if this first contest was any indication, the contests around here are pretty darn good. I really hope you enjoyed watching this, and unfortunately, this is the end of my introduction to literary pie, or literature pie, I should say. These 3 videos are basically the culmination of the contract I signed for LP, but don't worry, Pico and I are going to be working out, hopefully, another contract, so hopefully I will be back with some more videos in the not-so-distant future. Don't worry, I have plenty of ideas. Thank you very much for watching. My name has been Gary Oak.
Pie is quite tasty, don't you think?
Bye.